Coffee with a Shot of Qualia. Thought Experiments, Part 6. "This coffee is awful," Mr. Chase and Mr. Sanborn blurted in unison. "It's strange, isn't it?" Chase continued. "It is the same coffee, so it tastes exactly the same as it always has, but I no longer like it. My preferences have changed." Sanborn shook his head. "That's not my experience at all. The coffee tastes completely different to me now. My preferences haven't changed at all. If only my taste buds still worked the way they used to, I'd love it just as much as before." Chase and Sanborn's disagreement about why they no longer like a particular blend of coffee is the setting Daniel Dennett uses to challenge how we think about consciousness. We all take for granted that we know exactly what our experiences feel like. The taste of coffee, the sensation of pain, the vivid redness of a rose. These seemingly private and immediate experiences are what philosophers call qualia. The coffee taster's scenario raises a deceptively simple question. How can Chase and Sanborn be so sure about their own experiences? If we can't reliably tell whether it is our sensations that have changed or our preferences for them, how can we claim to have special, direct access to our conscious experiences at all? This article is part 6 of our series on thought experiments in the philosophy of mind. So far, we have focused on thought experiments about dualism, and all of the ones we've discussed so far, from philosophical zombies to Mary's room, have argued that there must be something special about consciousness that makes it separate from the objective physical world. Dennett takes aim at this idea. He uses Chase and Sanborn's coffee tasting predicament to challenge whether there really is anything uniquely special about our mental lives that makes it something beyond the reach of science. So we might ask, does the coffee taster's thought experiment successfully challenge our intuitions about consciousness? To find out, let's explore 3 key questions. 1. What exactly happens in the coffee taster's thought experiment? 2. Why might we find the coffee taster's argument convincing? And 3. Why might we reject Dennett's argument? Question 1. What happens in the coffee tasters? Dennett introduces us to 2 coffee tasters, Mr. Chase and Mr. Sanborn, who work for a coffee company. Their job is to ensure that the taste of the company's distinctive coffee blend remains consistent over time. One day, about 6 years into their employment, they discover they both no longer like the coffee, despite having loved it when they started working there. They know the coffee itself hasn't changed. The chemical analysis confirms the blend remains exactly the same, and their colleagues insist it tastes just as it always has. But Chase and Sanborn offer different explanations for their changed relationship with the coffee. Mr. Chase believes the coffee tastes exactly the same to him as it always did, but his preferences have evolved. He's become a more sophisticated coffee drinker and simply no longer enjoys that particular taste. Mr. Sanborn, however, insists his preferences haven't changed at all. Instead, he believes his taste perception system has somehow changed, perhaps his taste buds or neural processing. So the coffee now produces a different taste experience for him than it used to. This seemingly simple disagreement sets up Dennett's challenge. Could Chase or Sanborn be wrong? And if they were wrong, how could they possibly know? Question 2. Why might we find the coffee taster's argument convincing? The coffee taster's thought experiment is one of 15 thought experiments, or intuition pumps, in Dennett's provocative paper, Quining Qualia. That strange word quining is Dennett's playful nod to philosopher Willard Van Orman Quine, who liked to question whether seemingly obvious concepts are necessary or meaningful. To quine something, Dennett suggests, is to deny resolutely the existence or importance of something real or significant. What Dennett wants to quine resolutely are qualia. Dennett isn't denying that we have experiences, despite what some critics may claim. What he's denying is that the experiences we have are special in the way philosophers have traditionally claimed. Imagine taking a sip of coffee. According to the traditional philosophical view, that taste experience has 4 essential features. It is ineffable, meaning you can never fully capture it in words. Try as you might to describe that coffee taste, but something always seems to be missing from the description. Intrinsic. Qualia is pure and non-relational. They are not built from or depend on other things. The taste just is what it is. Private. Only you can access your particular coffee experience. Someone else might be tasting the same coffee, but your experience is yours alone. And immediately apprehensible. You don't have to think about it or figure it out. You just instantly know how that coffee tastes to you. Dennett uses the story about 2 coffee tasters to systematically dismantle each of these supposedly essential features of qualia. Let's take each in turn. Ineffability. Dennett argues that even though it might be tricky to describe exactly how something tastes to us, this doesn't mean the experience of tasting coffee is mysterious. It simply means it's really, really complex. Imagine the exact pattern of a torn piece of paper. It would be practically impossible to capture every tiny detail of the jagged edge in words. What if our experience is like that? When Chase struggles to tell Sanborn exactly how the coffee tastes to him, it might not be because there's something unspeakable or metaphysically special about this experience. It might simply be that, like the torn paper edge, there's too much detail to capture in language. Intrinsic. Philosophers have long insisted that the way things seem, like the way coffee tastes to you, is just, well, the way it is. Pure and simple, rock bottom, not made up or dependent on anything else, an irreducible fact about your experience. But Dennett argues this isn't really true. Take a sip of coffee right after eating something sweet. It tastes bitter and harsh. Take a sip from the same coffee a few minutes later, and now it's smooth and mellow. Even colour, which seems like the most basic property of experience, isn't what it seems. I've included an image in the article. 2 squares on the cube appear to be completely different, even though the same wavelengths of light are hitting your eyes. Your experience of colour is not a raw feeling. It's based not just on the wavelengths of light, but on their relationship to the surrounding context. So, if how something tastes to you or appears to you depends on your experiences, whatever state you're in at the moment, and the current context, then your experiences aren't a pure, non-relational thing that happens in isolation. Your experiences are not intrinsic. Private. People have different tastes. For example, some people think broccoli tastes metallic, while others don't. This isn't because of some special private mental property, but because of differences in our physical makeup. In this case, largely genetic differences, specifically involving the bitter taste receptor gene TAS2R38. Dennett argues that just as we each have different fingerprints or different immune systems, we have different perceptual systems too. Our experiences feel private, But that's not because we have special mental properties. It's because we have different detection systems that are uniquely ours. What we call private is simply having personal, idiosyncratic reactions. Immediate apprehension. According to Mr. Chase, his qualia have stayed the same while working at the coffee company. It is his attitude or preferences for those qualia that have changed. Mr. Sanborn, on the other hand, believes his qualia have changed because something about his perceptual system has changed. But he believes his coffee preferences remain the same. The question is, could Mr. Chase and Mr. Sanborn be wrong? Yes, they could both be wrong. Chase might actually be experiencing the change Sanborn describes, while Sanborn might be experiencing the preference change Chase reports. The point, Dennett argues, is that there is no way for either of them to know by simply thinking about it. This raises serious doubts about the immediate apprehension of qualia. If we want to understand what's really happening with Chase and Sanborn, we'd need to conduct empirical tests. For instance, we could give Chase a blind taste test to see if he could reliably identify and distinguish between different coffees over short time periods. If he performs poorly, this would cast doubt on his claim that the coffee still tastes the same to him. Or we might run neurological tests on Sanborn. We could put him in a brain scanner and see if his responses to coffee have changed. But Dennett argues if Chase and Sanborn need outside observers and objective tests to understand what's really happening, then their experiences are not directly accessible. Their immediate apprehension is an illusion. Some find Dennett's argument appealing because it acknowledges that we have experiences without claiming that they are made up of some special mental stuff that science cannot understand. But not everyone is convinced. Let's look at why some philosophers think Dennett's argument falls short. Question 3. Why might we reject Dennett's argument? There are 3 key objections to Dennett's position. 1. The memory problem. Philosopher Ned Block raises what we might call the memory problem. His point is pretty straightforward. Dennett is mixing up 2 different things, our experience and our memory. Chase and Sanborn are trying to compare the taste of coffee today with how they remember it tasting 6 years ago. Block argues that this distinction matters because memory is notoriously unreliable, as we have recently discussed, even for vivid experiences. Just because we can't perfectly remember or compare experiences across time doesn't mean we don't have direct access to our current conscious experiences. Chase and Sanborn might be wrong about whether their coffee experience has changed, but that doesn't mean they are wrong about how it tastes to them now. Dennett might reply, this distinction between our experiences and our memory fails. Experience depends on memory. There is no pure, instantaneous now of experience that we can isolate and declare separate from memory. When you take a sip of coffee, your brain is busy comparing it to other tastes, recognizing it as coffee, and judging whether it is good or bad. These processes involve memory. Our experiences only make sense as part of an ongoing process of recognition and comparison, which requires memory. If our memory is shaky and we can't separate experience from memory, where does that leave our supposed direct access to our experiences? Dennett would say experience is not looking so direct after all. 2. Setting the bar too high. But wait, is Dennett asking too much here? He seems to think that for qualia to be real, we need to be 100% certain about our experiences all the time. That, according to philosopher David Chalmers, is setting the bar impossibly high. Imagine you're walking down a dark alley and suddenly feel something press against your back. In that first terrifying moment, you might feel a sharp, painful sensation and think, oh no, a knife. Only later do you realize that it wasn't a knife. It was just someone holding an ice-cold drink against your back. Defenders of Qualia might agree that you were wrong about what caused the sensation. But weren't you still directly experiencing something? They argue there is a distinction to be made between the raw feeling, the direct experience, and the interpretation of that feeling. Your interpretation of the feeling was off, but that raw feeling, whether it was sharpness or coldness, was immediate and not reducible to interpretation, even if that interpretation was wrong. So maybe we can get things wrong about our experiences without having to throw out the whole idea of qualia. Perhaps we can accept that we are fallible about our experiences while still maintaining that there's something it feels like to have them in the first place. Dennett might reply, if we lower the bar for what counts as direct apprehension of qualia to allow for the possibility of mistakes, we are essentially admitting that our access to these supposedly special mental properties is no longer different from our understanding of other physical things in the world. If we can be wrong about the weight of an object or the temperature of a room, just as we can be wrong about our experiences, what makes those experiences special? If you can be wrong about whether you're experiencing sharpness or coldness, then you're not directly apprehending any raw feels at all. You're making a complex judgment based on various processes, and there's no need to declare special mental properties to explain that. 3. The hard problem remains. Perhaps the most fundamental objection to Dennett's argument is that it doesn't really address what David Chalmers later called the hard problem of consciousness. The fact that Chase and Sanborn need objective tests to determine how their experiences have changed doesn't explain why they have experiences in the first place. A purely functional coffee tasting machine might perform all the same discriminations without having any conscious experience whatsoever. So, even if we grant that Dennett has successfully argued against a particular philosophical conception of qualia, he hasn't eliminated the deeper mystery. Why is there any conscious experience in the first place? Why aren't we all just sophisticated machines processing the taste of coffee like pea zombies? Dennett would likely respond, there isn't really a hard problem of consciousness at all. This is just one more attempt to rescue the intuition that there must be something special and mysterious about consciousness that science can't explain. When you say the coffee tasting machine might make all the same discriminations without having any conscious experience, you are assuming we have the very thing that needs to be proven. You're asserting qualia exists and then using the very assertion as evidence against my argument. That is circular reasoning. He might continue, everything we want to explain about Chase and Sanborn's experiences, how they recognize different coffees, react to them, and compare them to past tastes, can be explained through objective patterns of discrimination and reaction. Just as we don't believe there is some special voiciness floating around beyond the physical properties of speech or some magical valueness that makes money valuable, there's no special feelingness left over that requires special mental properties to explain. The sum up. In this series on thought experiments in the philosophy of mind, we've been circling around one central question. Is there something special about consciousness that sets it apart from physical things? The philosophical zombies, disembodied pain, bats, and Mary in her black and white room all argue that conscious experience can't be reduced to purely physical processes. But Dennett challenges this idea. What if our certainty about the special nature of consciousness is built on shaky ground? If we can't even explain whether our own experiences have changed or our reactions to them have changed, what does this mean for consciousness? Are our subjective experiences really as special and separate as we thought? Are we fooling ourselves if we think consciousness is mysterious? Or is Dennett missing the point? Where do you find yourself in this debate? Next week. Actually, there won't be a next week for a little while. I'll be taking a short break from the newsletter to recharge and to plan for an exciting 2025. I have some exciting new directions I want to explore with all of you, and I can't wait to share them in the new year. Thank you so much for an amazing 2024. Your thoughts have made this little newsletter an absolute joy to write. Have a wonderful holiday season, and I'll see you in the new year with fresh ideas, questions, and puzzles to ponder. Happy holidays.